Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to TET. Brian and I have been working steadfastly trying to get a show ready concerning David Flynn, 888, and the center of time. So I want everybody to know, first off, that on David Flynn's YouTube channel, he come out with a little short video about 888 and what he saw. He also went on a program and talked about this. Well, understand this, that one of the things that I had wanted to do myself was get together with David and discuss the importance of the eclipse that we just had on November the 14th. Now, remember, that was cross date lines. So it was some in the 13th and some in the 14th. The point being that from the Temple Mount time, the distance between that eclipse and the infamous doomsday date of December 21st, 2012 is 888 hours. But before we get started, I'd like Brian to go ahead and play that video that is of David's, and we will give you a link to that in the show notes. Brian, take it away. Well, I hope you enjoyed that video and what it was that David was bringing to light on the situation. And ladies and gentlemen, you know, everything that that has been covered about the distance, and as David pointed out in his book, Temple at the Center of Time, as we get into the dark time, boy, there are things that are just really off the charts. We have lots of things to discuss with this concept of 888. And there's so many things that we can cover. But I want everybody to know that this also concerns the meridian through the middle of time. Many people are aware of that Damascus is going to be destroyed. We might cover some of that here later. But concerning the 888, me and Brian's going to talk about that a little bit. And Brian, why don't you go ahead and you have so much to cover. I have so much to cover. Let's just get to it and pick a place to start, and let's get it done.
All right. Well, I think one of the first things to start out with here is the Georgia-Russian conflict that took place in 2008.
Well, the UN International Court is due to announce a decision on Georgia's legal action against Russia. Tbilisi is accusing Moscow of violating an international convention during the conflict in South Ossetia in 2008. RT's Gane Chichikan reports on why the case is rife with hypocrisy.
Warm welcome and firm handshakes for someone who just 3 years ago gave the order that led to the deaths of civilians in the Republic of South Ossetia.
I'm dealing with one of the great leaders of the world.
The Georgian president, with his fluent English, is a welcome guest on American TV shows, where he's never asked the question, why, in the middle of the night, on August the 7th of 2008, did Georgia begin the major artillery bombardment of the sleeping city of Tskhinval and other peaceful towns nearby. The region, which Georgia wanted to bring under its control, was razed to the ground. Hundreds were killed in the attack. Joe Mestas nearly lost his daughter in Saakashvili's bombings. She was visiting relatives in one of the towns in South Ossetia.
I believe Saakashvili should be removed from office. I think he should be tried in international court for war crimes.
But when it comes to Mikhail Saakashvili, even though the EU finding mission determined that he started the war in 2008 and ordered the bloodbath in South Ossetia, the Georgian president is still supported in the West.
They have no strategic interest in supporting his overthrow. The notion that decisions get made on the basis of humanitarian concerns is simply false. It doesn't. It's not the basis for the decision about Libya. It's not the basis for decisions about Georgia, about Palestine, about Kosovo. The question of who's held responsible and how is very much a strategic question. It's not a legal question, as it should be.
To boost its strategic importance, among other things, Georgia has dispatched 1,000 troops to join allied forces in Afghanistan and became the leading troop contributor relative to Georgia's overall population. The boundless, and as this Fox News interview shows, almost unstoppable praise of the U.S. is also believed to have played a role in the West supporting Saakashvili, no matter what his crimes.
America is liked because it's based on values, and America, and more freedom prevails, the safer American world gets.
You're the best. Good seeing you.
Now, as the world has declared a no-fly zone over Libya to stop Gaddafi, many wonder why a no-fly zone was never on the table when the Georgian president launched his deadly campaign, or when Israel bombed the Gaza for 3 weeks in a row.
On the question, for example, of Gaza, where you had a blatant act of aggression, clearly a massive violation of not only international human rights norms, but war crimes, crimes against humanity being created, 1,400 people killed, of whom more than 900 were civilians, more than 300 were children. It was a horrific situation that went on for days. The problem there is that Israel is the protectorate of the United States, and the U.S. was not going to allow anyone, the United Nations or anyone else, to actually engage in a serious way in stopping that massacre.
You would think if a leader commits atrocities, he would be treated like, say, Gaddafi, denounced, banned from travel, but history shows that's not the way politics works. The Georgian president killed scores of civilians, but was exonerated by the West. Politicians accept him as a friend. Business leaders are looking to invest in his country. And it seems the U.S. is happy to continue turning a blind eye to the blood on Saakashvili's hands. I'm Knights Templar reporting from Washington.
Well, Brian, that was certainly a good place to start when we're talking about this guy. That is for sure. Everybody take just a little bit of note of what they said. Understand this. Please understand that not only is the eclipse from November 14th, not only is that the distance in time to December 21st, 2012, take note of this. This man's birthday, this very bloody man that gets away with it, not only that, he is one of the very few people probably in history to be threatened by a Russian leader, and literally the Russian leader threatened to assassinate him and walked away unscathed. You need to understand that his birthday is December 21st, 2012. Now, take note. When he was born, Brian, why don't you jump in here? What year was this man born? I mean, how can this possibly be significant? Especially concerning the prophecies of Daniel. I mean, this begins to get off the charts. I mean, as we watched that video from David Flynn, and we understand that on 888 times from the Temple Mount, the 5-crossed flag happened there. This is just off the charts. So, what's your thoughts about this man? Because to me, this is really, really off the charts.
Well, there's so many things to cover with this guy. I mean, you've got the fact alone that he was born in 1967. This puts you exactly 45 years to the date of the Mayan prophecy of December 21st, 2012. Now, when you stop and consider the fact that this is also the person that launched this conflict on August 8th of 2008, where he literally attacked Ossetia against Russia and started this war, and it just goes deeper and deeper and deeper the more you just look into those very factors alone. I'm not even sure which portion to go down yet. And now, concerning Israel, one of the primary things to understand is that Israel was supplying them with weaponry, with drones and quite a few other things, right up until this conflict started. Then immediately they pulled everything out and commenced to support Russia in the midst of it. And it just, the whole situation with this guy is just treachery. It's about the only thing I can even think to begin to describe this. When he came into office, basically the guy would not step down that was the leader before him, and this was known as the Rose Revolution that took place, if memory serves me correctly, it was either 2003 or 2005. And this guy basically would not step out of office, and Saakashvili stormed the place and pretty much took over. The leaders of the United States, George Bush, was meeting with the Syrian nations, the leaders of these Syrian nations. And when you take a look at this picture, lo and behold, Mr. Saakashvili is sitting right there.
Well, let's consider the location of Ossetia, shall we? Now, the thing that amazes me is that when you know the location of the meridian through the middle of time, and in order to do that, you have to have the new north and south poles where they were at the days of Noah. You'd have to know that. But when you follow that track up, it gets very enlightening because David was very, very close. He was just one step from figuring out the meridian through the middle of time. Brian's going to play just a very short video. It has no audio, so I will do some commentary on it while it plays. Do want to say this, that the meridian goes through a garden. That garden is very, very, very close to the infamous square where the Syrian conflicts started. That square is called the Al-Mahar Square. It's just, well, understand this, that the temple, the new temple, Ezekiel's temple, is 112 cubits wide, and it is well within that distance away from this place that we're going to show you, the Armenian garden. Now, in this garden, there are two flower circular planters, shall we say. They are about, I would say, about 22 feet wide. But one is on one side of a bath and one is on the other side of the bath. And understand this, the meridian through the middle of time goes right through it. They've literally marked it off because they're this circular flower pattern and a dome that is there on a bathhouse, and then on the other side of it, there's another one. The meridian in the middle of time goes straight through them. It's rather quite amazing. Take note that Al-Amar Square, where the difficulties began in Syria, take note that means the square of martyrs, and it does that for a reason. But Brian, why don't you go ahead and play that video? All right, what we're looking at here, ladies and gentlemen, is the meridian that goes from the New North Pole through the Temple Mount, most importantly, the foundation stone of creation, through to the South Pole. This is the new meridian. Take note that everybody should be familiar with the destruction of Damascus prophecies and the relationship of the new temple. You'll take note that there in Ezekiel 47 and 48, it makes perfectly clear that the new north will be this line as it goes straight through Damascus. Now here, take note that flanking it on both sides, you have the Mahara Square, which is the Square of the Martyrs, and on the other side of it, you have the Citadel of Damascus. And we know that Ezekiel's temple is, by all extrapolations, it is 112 cubics wide when you go from the exterior of the walls. Now, take note that heights are not given in that temple, but we literally are given by God the width of the meridian, because it should be, of course, an infinite point, or rather the opposite of that, as some people think. It should just be an imaginary equaling zero line. But when you take that width through here, and you're going to take note that right here, as you see my my zoom circle come in, you'll notice that bathhouse dome and these two circular planters that they used to plant flowers in. Now, this was taking during the winter time. I do have a very good photo of when they're celebrating here, and these circular planters there are full of flowers. Take note that the meridian through the middle of time goes directly through there, hence being absolute proof beyond any shadow of a doubt that the New World Order, or perhaps the Illuminati, as most people like to say, know exactly where the North Pole is going to be. That's why they've released many times that it is going to be in Siberia. And yes, it is. And take note here we go. We're going to zoom in again so you can get a very good close-up. Just concentrate on the Maharaj square, that red A bubble right there, and then to the right of that, that little pin there, the yellow pin, is the Citadel of Damascus. That's in the middle of the courtyard. So as you zoom in, you could see right there that it goes right through the dome and right through those two planters. So literally speaking, had David Flynn known this at that time, he would have been able to understand that what was happening in Ossetia was directly related to the time that is, of course, going to be the destruction of Damascus, and that has to do with the 88 or the 888. Here is the small article on that square where all of the trouble started in Syria. And take note that in that you might want to do some research, because in that park it has a pole, and on that pole is a small representation of another mosque that's in Turkey. This is a small article on the Citadel of Damascus, and you might want to research that, especially the small building that is in the southwestern corner that they do not know its origins, how long it's been there. So please do some little bit of research on that. But this is a very good shot. You can clearly see where the meridian through the middle of time lies and how it's perfectly marked off by this place. This is a local mosque that is there, relatively close to it. And I also marked off several other things, like the ancient synagogue that is there. It doesn't lie too awfully far off the meridian. But everything that we've just shown you is within 112 cubits of the meridian through the middle of time, which I'm sure that makes everyone think of the prophecies concerning that. It really just is off the charts. Here you're panning around and you see how these streets are in certain diagonals from the meridian in the middle of time. And actually, if you take some of these measurements, I can't do it here in this screenshot, but the angles of those streets, especially the street called Straight, if you take the angle from that to the meridian through the middle of time, it would literally blow your mind, that angle, because that angle is very critical in the mechanics of everything. So I hope that you enjoyed that little bit of knowledge, and the simple fact that I wish that David could have been a part of this. He would have literally had so much he could have give. He could have probably given by far more than me concerning this topic. But if he would have just known that the meridian through the middle of time went right through the place with which all of the fighting was taking place, I could have actually helped him along and give him actually target points and routes of actually what did take place on the ground. So this brings us up to 888, and 888 is a wealth of information. It is just a wealth of information. And Brian, if you can take me back to video, I'll go ahead and speak just for a few minutes on this. There's lots that can be said about the number 888. Make no mistakes about that. One of its properties, which is very interesting indeed, is that this number is special in mathematics. It is extremely special, as a matter of fact. It is called a Nineveh-morphic number. That is Nineveh-morphic number. What that means is that, stated mathematically, all of its integers added up equals itself. And what is more important is the man whom this term is named off of, by the way, just so you know. There is an asteroid called Nineveh as well. And understand this, that during the dark time with which we have been speaking, it will be in the same proximity as the asteroid Ganymede there in Hydra, the snake that has the mortal head. It has many heads. But take note that this word, the etymology of this word Nevin or Nevin, take note that that means holy or saint in the Gaelic language. So whenever you even get into what this number means, what it is, it's absolutely amazing. And when we get into the biblical mechanics of it, it's enough to blow your mind, because it's going to take you somewhere that is so critically important for today's church to know. Because a lot of people do not understand a certain prophecy that's in the Bible. It causes lots of consternation with many people. And, it should, as a matter of fact, it should cause quite a lot of stir with people, because many people say that the prophecy is not in the Bible. It's not there. But 888 will take you directly to what the prophecy means that many people don't understand. It's that prophecy that's given in Matthew, the 2nd chapter, and I shall read from the 22nd verse. But when he heard that Archelaus was reigning in Judea in the place of his father Herod, he was afraid to go there. Then, after being warned by God in a dream, he left for the region of Galilee and came and lived in a city called Nazareth. This was to fulfill what was spoken through the prophets. He shall be called a Nazarene. Take note that will take you directly to 888. Please understand that this will take you locked in step with one chapter in the Bible. It is Daniel, the 6th chapter. And take note that the words given and used here, you're going to have to understand that one is in verse 2 of that chapter. And I shall read that verse to you. Over them 3 commissioners, of whom Daniel was one, that these satraps might be accountable to them, that the king might not suffer loss. It's that word loss there. Now you're going to take note that if you go back to Matthew, the 2nd chapter, you'll take note of how many stanzas are there. You'll also take note of what happened there, but this prophecy referred to is actually the 4th one. So you understand that God has magnified that in your mind. Now, the words Nezak, that is in verse 14 of this very same chapter. So take note that these 2 verses, of course being a total of 13, in time, it literally is encoded here when we would be pointed to the 13th constellation, as me and Brian was discussing the other day. So take note that word H, 888, and the word Nizak, which is in Aramaic. See, that's why people overlook this. This word is the word for Nazarite, not in Hebrew, because it's in Daniel. It's in Aramaic. So understand that through this prophecy right here and the things that happened with Daniel, please take note that through this, mechanically speaking, the Lord our God has gave us the answer to that, why the prophecy he would be called a Nazarite or a Nazarene, all depending on your translation that you're using. So the ramifications of this is off the charts. And I will read to you verse 14, just so you can understand what the Lord your God has done concerning this prophecy, how it was tied in with the simple fact that, well, read it for yourself one more time and understand what the king said about Daniel and how many was with him, and more importantly, how many was under them, because there was a certain amount of number that was accountable to those people. Verse 14, then as soon as the king heard this statement, he was deeply distressed and sent out his mind on delivering Daniel. And even until sunset, he kept exerting himself to rescue him. Of course, this is the very infamous time when the bad king, had thrown Daniel, well, he was supposed to die. And at this point in time, the bad king worried all night long. This here distressed over Daniel. That right there, okay, take note, that this is the answer to Matthew chapter 2, the 22nd and 23rd verse. That is why they knew that he was going to be a Nazirite. It's not because of the Hebrew. You can never find it in the Hebrew. It's not there. You have to know the language that is locked in the middle. Okay, you have Hebrew. You have the one in the middle, which is portions of Daniel, and of course Ezra, Nehemiah. Those are Aramaic. And then you have Greek on the other side. So this is the language in the middle. And that's why this prophecy is here. It is designed so that you know that locked into this in time, if you know the riddle of the 888 and what it means, and even who it means, because it also means something else. It will take you directly to the time of a particular name. And Brian's going to share that one. But understand this, that mechanically speaking, this is so absolutely perfect that it's enough to blow your mind once you get your mind around it just exactly, that H888 is an Aramaic word, and the root of that in the Hebrew is in the same exact chapter. It's root word, what it goes back to be distressed. So this is absolutely amazing that both of these words would be used inside of this chapter. It's absolutely amazing. And it really is enough to blow your mind. But let me pass it over to Brian. And he's going to talk about biblical mechanics for a little bit. And then I will get back to distances and David Flynn's correlation with distances from the Temple Mount being a direct correlation with what was to come. Because there are other distances, 888, that is down on the ground, and they are very significant indeed. And when you learn of their word, oh, then your eyes will be open. And it's very exciting. Everything that the Bible entails about 888 being a Ninevan morphic number, it's probably pretty plain to everybody that I love numbers. I always have. And so we could literally go on about this for weeks. And maybe we should in honor of our brother David. And right now, Brian's going to take it over for just a few minutes. We're going to get into the biblical mechanics of it because Brian has a whole lot to share.
Well, one of the first things I'd like to look at is when you go over to BibleWheel.com and you take and type in the number 888, you get the entire database of everything it says here. Now, I think one of the first things I do want to cover first, though, here is the fact alone that there is only one verse in the entire Bible that is 1 Chronicles 8, verse 16. That equals 888. And the name in here is enough to really catch you. And Michael and Isaph and Joha, the sons of Beriah. And right here you've got the name Michael again. But as Matthew and I had spoken about earlier, this is also going to take you to one other place. That's Revelation chapter 12. So, moving forward with this, there was quite a few other little different, real interesting pieces in here. Jeremiah 19 verse 11 is something that really is going to take you around to somewhere else. And shall say unto them, thus saith the Lord of hosts, even so I will break this people and this city as one breaketh a potter's vessel, that cannot be made whole again, and they shall bury them in Tophet, till there be no place to bury. And when you look at this place, Tophet, you start to see some very interesting things. Specifically, this place was a location in Jerusalem that was near the Valley of Hinnom. And there was basically Moloch and Baal worship that was going on here in this place. Now, you get a little bit more information over here in this article from the Jewish Encyclopedia. The Old Testament term used chiefly in Jeremiah, and once again in 2 Kings, to designate a place in one of the valleys just outside the walls of Jerusalem. The meaning of the word is much in dispute. W. Robertson Smith connects it with an Aramaic loanword, which means fireplaces. The formation of the word is similar to Moloch and Ashtaroth. The passage in Kings locates the place in the Valley of the Son of Hinnom. Now, there are 3 valleys in Jerusalem, which covers just below the Pool of Siloam. Kidron from the east side by the city, Wadi at El Rabeh. And this goes into quite a bit more detail. Now, as you further break down this word, though, especially when you start looking at what it brings up here in the Wikipedia article on Tophet, it redirects you from the Valley of Haman to Gehenna. And Gehenna is the term place outside ancient Jerusalem, known in the Bible as the Valley of the Son of Hinnom, one of the principal valleys surrounding the old city. And this is brought up in a few different places. The words Gehenna. So it's kind of interesting to take note of that once you look at what the 888th chapter of the Bible is, because that happens to be Amos 9. And I'll go ahead and read that here. I saw the Lord standing beside the altar, and he said, smite the capitals so that the thresholds will shake, and break them on the heads of them all. Then I will slay the rest of them with the sword. They will not have a fugitive who will flee, or a refuge who will escape. Though they dig into Sheol, from there will my hand take them. And though they ascend to heaven, from there I will bring them down. Though they hide on the summit of Carmel, I will search them out and take them from there. And though they conceal themselves from my sight on the floor of the sea, from there I will command the serpent, and it will bite them. And though they go into captivity before their enemies, from there I will command the sword, that it slay them. And I will set my eyes against them for evil and not for good. The Lord God of hosts, the one who touches the land so that it melts, and all those who dwell in it mourn. And all of it rises up like the Nile, and subsides like the Nile of Egypt. The one who builds his upper chambers in the heavens, and has founded his vaulted dome over the earth. He who calls for the waters of the sea, and pours them out on the face of the earth. The Lord is his name. Are you not as the sons of Ethiopia to me, O sons of Israel, declares the Lord? Have I not brought up Israel from the land of Egypt, and the Philistines from Caphtor, and the Arameans from Kir? Behold, the eyes of the Lord God are on the sinful kingdom, and I will destroy it from the face of the earth. Nevertheless, I will not totally destroy the house of Jacob, declares the Lord. For behold, I am commanding, and I will shake the house of Israel among the nations, as grain is shaken in a sieve, but not as a kernel will fall to the ground. All the sinners of my people will die by the sword, those who say the calamity will not overtake or confront us. In that day I will raise up the fallen booth of David, and wall up its breaches. I will also raise up its ruins, and rebuild it as in the days of old, that they may possess the remnant of Edom. And all the nations who are called by my name, declares the Lord, who does this, behold, the days are coming, declares the Lord, when the plowman will overtake the reaper, and the treader of grapes, him who sows seed. And the mountains will drip sweet wine, and the hills will be dissolved. Also I will restore the captivity of my people Israel, and they will rebuild the ruined cities and live in them. They will plant vineyards and drink their wine, and make gardens and eat their fruit. I will also plant them on their land, and they will not again be rooted out from their land, which I have given them, says the Lord your God. Now, when you continue to look through the other words that you're going to find here that equal 888, you start to see quite a few different interesting things. Now, one of the very ones to take note of is, where did it go? Right here in Matthew 1, verse 16. And that is the word for Jesus. And Jacob begot Joseph, the husband of Mary, of whom was born Jesus, who is called Christ. And so this is kind of goes into something Matthew and I discussed yesterday, as a matter of fact. And this is Micah chapter 5. And let me just read this here, and then Matthew and I could talk back and forth about this a little bit more. Now muster yourselves in troops, daughter of troops. They have laid siege against us. With a rod they will smite the judge of Israel on the cheek. But as for you, Bethlehem Ephratah, too little to be among the clans of Judah. From you one will go forth for me to be ruler in Israel. His goings forth are from long ago, from the days of eternity. Therefore he will give them up until the time when she who is in labor has borne a child. Then the remainder of his brethren will return to the sons of Israel, and he will arise and shepherd his flock in the strength of the Lord, in the majesty of the name of the Lord his God, and they will remain, because at that time he will be great to the ends of the earth. This one will be our peace when the Assyrian invades our land, when he tramples on our citadels. Then we will raise against him 7 shepherds and 8 leaders of men. They will shepherd the land of Assyria with the sword, the land of Nimrod at its entrances, and he will deliver us from the Assyrian when he attacks our land and when he tramples our territory. And I think I'll stop there for that portion of it, Matthew, and be curious to get your take on this.
Well, the direct links and correlations with that chapter you just mentioned being tied in with 888. Understand that in time and in mechanics, the Lord has set this up so that you would absolutely know beyond any shadow of a doubt when this time came, it was going to be directly related to Michael's time, that time when he would stand up as the great prince and cast out Satan and his host from heaven. It's mechanically injected into the Bible so that you would know. And when it takes you to that exact verse, and when you think about it, that what took place on 888, as David Flynn showed the entire world, That distance from the Temple Mount being 888 is enough to blow your mind, because that tells you that this is tied directly to the time when Damascus would be destroyed. So inside of time, it's enough to blow you away. Now, many people can't put these things together in their mind because everybody is all confused about, is the Assyrian the Antichrist? That's where the main problem lies. But the Bible is very clear, and we've talked about this many times before. The Assyrian actually plays the inverted role of John the Baptist. He is a type of silhouette in the Scripture. In the Old Testament, we had the shadow, and in the New Testament, we have a silhouette, and that is what is to come. Understand this, that this is all tied up. The Assyrian people doing this, most importantly, the people that Brian has been talking about, because this has everything to do with Nestorianism, and most people don't even know what that is. They don't realize that the Church of the East are comprised entirely of Assyrians. Another church is called by a different name, and that's entirely comprised of Assyrians from that are of Persian origin. But understand this, that their big contention, and the reason why they're always picked on, is this: they believe in Nestorianism. They do not grant unto Mary the title of Theokotos, which means the bearer of God. They reject that. So they have on one side the Catholics that absolutely hate them because they don't give Mary divinity. On the other side, the other people that persecute them, the Muslims, they reject that God had a son. That's the last thing on earth they want to believe. Now, understand that the Muslims and the Catholics, they both believe in Jesus. Both of them do. But we all know that the Muslims do not worship Jesus and the Catholics worship Mary. And the Assyrians, the Georgians, the Armenians, all those countries that Brian has been talking about, that's why they're in the middle of them. And that is why, take note, that when these things happen, that's why the Assyrian is going to rise. He's not going to tolerate that. And so just understand that why, historically speaking, the Assyrian people have always come underneath fire from both sides. They've always been greatly persecuted because of this simple fact. And this is just amazing that, mechanically speaking, the Lord our God has given to us through this number 888 a series of events. He told us exactly where to look for the Assyrian, and of course that's been washed underneath the rug. But take note of this: it is why Caucasians are called Caucasians. It is that people which lies on the southern border of the northern and southern Caucasus. Take note that the meridian through the middle of time goes right in the midst of both of them. So understand that the Assyrians, historically speaking, we are talking about Chaldeans, we are talking about the Babylonians. Their northern border was always the Caucasus Mountains. It always was. You can find this on maps, as was in David Flynn's video that we played earlier. That was always known to be exactly what it was. That was Gog and Magog. It's always been known that way. So through distance, as David Flynn pointed out, through time, and through mechanical apparatus of the Word of the living God, which is perfect, and it is a palindrome that makes it both a silhouette and a shadow. Through those machinations, the Lord has most perfectly made it possible to always know what is to come. Always. He has signified it and sealed it with his word. So, you know, what is amazing to me is that on the other side of the fence, let me talk just a little bit about 888 and the Greek. I'm not going to get into it very extensively. I will say this, that before I talked about H888, so now I will talk about G888. 888. Both of them in direct and dire circumstances concerning what is to come. Now, take note that G 888 is twice in the Bible, and both times it is, very dire in its presentation. It's in Matthew chapter 25, verse 30, and it's in Luke 17, verse 10. And understand this, that this is very dire, and what it says in Matthew, it is concerning the parable of the talents. And you'll take note that mechanically in this chapter, it's put perfectly, because the very next verse, understand this, the next verse, verse 31 is the next stanza, and that's the judgment. Okay, so mechanically, God's done it to you again by mechanically telling you that you have 888 is in the midst of when all these things would take place, especially the judgment. But let me read, I'll read verse 29 and 30 so you get the spill of Matthew chapter 25. For to everyone who has, okay, more shall be given, and he will have abundance. But from the one who does not have, even what he does have will be taken away. Throw out the worthless slave in the outer darkness. In that place there will be a weeping and a gnashing of teeth. Please try to understand there that what he's talking about is the ride of the eagle's wings, Operation Eagle's Wings. That's what he's talking about. Now, the very next verse, I will go ahead and just, I'll read 31, 32, and 33. You can read the rest, but just so you get the spiel that the next thing that is mentioned is the time of the judgment. Verse 31, but when the Son of Man comes in his glory and all the angels with him, then he will sit on his glorious throne. All the nations will be gathered before him. He will separate them one from another, as a shepherd separates the sheep from the goats. And he will put the sheep on his right and the goats on his left. Now, so take note. So we have here, understand this, that what you have here in verses 14 through 30 of the parable of the talents, mechanically speaking, this is referring to this dark time. The time which would be mentioned in the book of Revelation is the day of he who sits upon the throne. Okay? That day is magnified, and just like the book of Revelation, in that same portion, the next thing it says, and the day of the Lamb. That's what you just got. He doesn't tell you all what's in between. He tells you the day of he who sits upon the throne, and then he tells you about the day of he who is the Lamb. Mechanically perfectly done. Now let us get to Luke, where this word is. It is mentioned in the very last sentence of the, instructions, because what happens in verse 11 is the parable of the 10 leopards, okay, or the 10 leopards cleansed. So take note what it says, and I'll read verse 10. So you too, when you do all the things which are commanded you, say, we are unworthy slaves, we have done only that which we ought have done. Understand that this is so prophetic, these 10 verses here. Most people read them and forget about them. But these verses, literally speaking, and how it jumps to the very next about the 10 leopards, and everybody understands that, the 10 virgins, and on and on and on and on and on it goes. So here too, mechanically, it is perfectly placed so that you will understand beyond any shadow of a doubt, this is the time when the Assyrian would come and trip the tribulation trigger. That's what it's for. Now, Brian has a whole lot more to add. We haven't even got into the dimensions of the matter. So, Brian, why don't you go ahead and take it back because there's so much that I have said that I could continue to say that in the midst of it, what I just shared, I think is enough. I shared about H888, and I have shared about G888, but that's just the beginning of the matter. That's just the beginning of it. So take it right back, Brian.
Well, I think I'm going to mention a few things because I just had a look at the 888th verse in the Bible, and maybe it's a little bit important to explain a few things about the Black Sea. Now, in Ptolemy's book of Geographia, he refers to the Black Sea as just the words, the sea. And when you take a look at this region of Georgia, it is on the southeastern side of the Black Sea. And when you start looking through the old maps that are associated with the dispersion of the nations and so forth, you find out that the area that settled here would be known as Javan, which is also rendered the same as in the Greek for our, well, it's the word that's rendered in the Hebrew as Greece is Javan. Once you put two and two together on that, all of a sudden this should start coming to mind in Daniel, where it speaks of the he-goat and the ram of Media-Persia. And the he-goat, it states, is the king of Greece. But like I said, once again, once you realize that this region in Georgia is the actual area where the descendants of Javan had settled, and it's right there by what is referred to as the sea, few connections start to come together. Let me explain this further. When you look at the history, the ancient history of these regions, and you really start to look at the entirety of the area throughout the Caucasus Mountains and up into Armenia, up into Turkey, and so forth, you start coming into some very interesting information when you look at the different deities that were worshipped by the different people groups throughout there. Now, when you start checking into the Kurdish people and the region that they had settled right around Lake Van, you end up finding out that they were involved with the worship of a certain angel. Now, some use the terminology of the peacock angel, but when you trace that down even further, you find out that this is connected to Azazel. And to break Azazel down, you have to understand that this is the only angel that is mentioned from the book of Enoch, one of the watchers of the 200 that came down on Mount Hermon in the time of Jared. It is the only one mentioned in the Bible, in the Hebrew, and the word used for it is scapegoat. So lo and behold, you're coming back around to this theme of a goat. But then when you stop and consider that the ancients referred to the Black Sea as the sea, then this takes things into a whole new realm. Now, there's so much ancient history that goes on with this entire region, and so much of it has really been lost throughout time. When we had started looking into this whole area a couple months back after we had stumbled on Mr. Saakashvili, it was very difficult to turn up any historical references about any of the time periods that were previous to the possibility of the early BC area. And about the only ones that you could find mentioned here and there were through Herodotus, and with specific mentions of a region known in the tale of Jason of the Argonauts, and it was associated with Perseus, of all things. And What gets really interesting now is when you start looking into the book written by Sir Isaac Newton that was the inspiration behind David Flynn's work with the temple at the center of time, the chronology of the kingdoms. When you look for that word in there, lo and behold, you get an extreme amount of hits referencing this one little tiny portion on the map that is now today is modern Georgia. Now, I got lucky in the fact that because I went on a pretty extensive search trying to get a hold of any material I could get my hands on in regards to this entire area of Georgia and the other surrounding nations. And it did take me quite a few trips to the used bookstore that I tend to frequent here because there's a lot of great finds that end up in there. And at about the third trip in there, I stumbled on a set of college handbooks that were passed on for the anthropology, the history, and the archaeological teachings that were taken from books that were translated out of Russia. And a lot of data was collected by them and had not seen the light of day until around the time that the Cold War had come to an end. And once you really start looking into the amount of information, the amount of different archaeological finds they have had, you quite literally are looking at a mass majority of things that we have come to know throughout the years of history literally being rewritten. Certain things that have remained in a state where people say, well, we don't know, we don't have any answers for. The Russians had this material the entire time. So the more I've started looking into this, it just keeps going deeper and deeper and deeper. And some of the different people groups in these regions, it opens a doorway into understanding who a few of the different groups are that are not known, where they are, who they are, etc., where they've gone. And it brings together the picture a lot more clearly about this entire region of Georgia, which is referenced over and over and over again. And it even goes into the nations of Azerbaijan and some of the other nations. And so trying to take this back around, because there's a lot of that material that I'm hoping to cover sometime in the future, because there's so much depth to it, and I really don't have an extensive amount prepared for it, but I wanted to touch on it at least now. But when you take this back around now, once you understand that it states that the he-goat has 4 horns, and we've spoken, at least on the radio shows, at length about the tetrarch, the rule of 4, that was mentioned with Herod. And what you're being told there in Daniel with this he-goat with 4 horns is you're looking for 4 leaders. You're looking specifically for 4 leaders of 4 nations that are going to form essentially a tetrarch. And as we started digging deeper into this research, we came across a group that was a mix between Georgia and some of these other nations that had essentially formed a 4-portion coalition. And lo and behold, you've stumbled into possibility of a fulfillment of the tetrarch and the he-goat of Daniel, all wrapped up in one. Now, just so many other things that we could go into here, but I think I'm going to hand the mic back over to Matthew here so I can get my thoughts collected a little bit more to try to move forward.
Well, let me throw this on you. What you just said about Yavan or Avan, you're going to have to take note of this, that if David Flynn had went just a little bit further north, if he would have known where the meridian through the middle of time was, right through the middle of it, you're going to have a little bit of history from Greek mythology, because there is, on one side is the volcano, most people would probably know this, Elborus, and flanking the other side is another volcano, Kazabek. Now, take note that I'm going to read about Kazabek first. And remember, these two volcanoes flank the meridian through the middle of time. Mount Kazabek is associated in Georgian folklore with Amarani, the Georgian version of Prometheus, who was chained on the mountain in punishment for stealing fire from the gods and giving it to mortals. The location of his imprisonment later became the site of Orthodox hermitage located in a cave called Bethlehem. At around 4,000 meter level, according to legends, this cave housed many sacred relics, including Abraham's tent and the manger of the infant Jesus. So just digest what I just said to you. Everybody does know that Prometheus is, of course, really talking about when Azazel came down and gave into the people there in Genesis chapter 6. Now let us go to the other one that flanks the other side, the other volcano, Mount Elborus. And just try to swallow this, okay? The ancients knew this mountain as Strombolius, Latin for pine cone, a direct loan from the ancient Greek, take note of that, ancient Greek, meaning a twisted object. Long established, the botanical term that describes the shape of the volcano's summit. Myth held that here Zeus had chained Prometheus, the titan who had stolen fire from the gods and given it to ancient man, likely a reference to historic volcanic activity. Okay, so take notes. That the only reason why, what you call to be a Greek legend, why does everybody know historically? And I mean everybody knows it historically. Everybody's probably well familiar with the simple fact that I am a major student of history. And the Prometheus legend was never in Greece. Not ever. Because that was associated with the sons of Hivan. Okay, and they were there on the flanks, okay, the southern portions of the Caucasus Mountains. You'll take note. Let me just read a little bit from the very first line from this description. Mount Elborus is a volcano located in the western Caucasus Mountain range in Russia near the border of Georgia. Mount Elborus's peak is the highest in the Caucasus. So just take note that that's what we're talking about. This is it's right there on the southern flank. You can, it's right there on the border between Georgia and it is the Russians that claim the heights. And when we go to the other mountain, which is right on the other side, it's almost like these two peaks mark off the meridian through the middle of time. In this one, Mount Kazbek is a volcano and one of the major mountains of the Caucasus, located in the Kazabegi district of Georgia and North Ossetia. So here's when you find out the whole truth of the matter. That right there where David Flynn had pointed you, you can literally look up from that plane and see these two mountain peaks, both of which are associated with Azazel. One of them is the cave in which is called, let me say that one more time so you get it straight, Bethlehem. It's called Bethlehem. This cave is. This is all associated with, the scapegoat. Azazel's proper name is in the Bible, even as Brian told you. His proper name is in the Bible. Everybody knows it, but the Christians, it is there. It's not scapegoat. It is a proper noun. It is Azazel, in direct reference to the incidents that happened there. in relationship to Genesis chapter 6. So take note that everybody knows this, and you can bet your bottom dollar that every single person that goes to church in the country of Georgia, in the country of Armenia, in the country of, and we can just keep listing them, Turkey, they all know this. And they all know where the myths came from about Prometheus. They all know it. So take note of that. And when you do understand this, that Brian told you that the Black Sea was always called the sea. I have read many ancient manuscripts, ladies and gentlemen, many. So many I couldn't even tell you how many. It's always referred to as the sea. That is why the people of Georgia and, people of the Eastern Orthodox Church, and we can go on down the line, and the Assyrians, they all know this, that the land in the midst of the seas, that has always referred to the Caspian Sea, and then you have the fence that the Lord, their God, has made called the Caucasus Mountains, and then you have the Black Sea. It's always been that way. That has always been the border of the Assyrians throughout history, whether they were called Babylonians or Chaldeans. These have always been their natural borders, and that's why Caucasians are called what they're called. That's why, and everybody knows it. So this brings this all up to a different level. This makes things enough to blow your mind that, and it did me when I was a very young Christian and I began to study all the things that Brian just told you about. Because please remember, ladies and gentlemen, I was never allowed to read anything except the history books, the encyclopedias, and the Bible. I wasn't permitted to read eschatological work by other people. I was never allowed to do that. So just take note that when Brian told you, boy, now it really makes sense. Just take note that right there is the key to everything, just like David Flynn pointed out. Of course, he realized that just because war broke out there in Ossetia. He had no idea the peaks that lied right there and the ramifications of what it meant, that this had to be the thing. And this was directly related in time to the destruction of Damascus. And that time, when the Lord our God has told us that true north is going to be the days of Noah north. That is going to be when the meridian is going to go back to where it's supposed to be. And Brian, maybe we ought to head in that direction just a little bit. You've been doing some research here lately, and maybe it's good for us to take a break away from the biblical mechanics and talk about some other things, because lots of people know this, like I stated earlier. But there's things even concerning, well, the pyramids that Brian's going to share with you. That's going to knock you off your chair, because it doesn't take very long for you to figure out that those people that run this planet, you call them, the NWO, or you call them the Illuminati. They know all these things. They know exactly where the North Pole is going, where the South Pole is, and where the location of the new South Pole is. We've, of course, had earthquakes there here really recently. And they also have several researches there on that jot of land that cradles it. I won't say too much more about that. But all these things are very important. And there's so much information here, we can't cover it all. We're running out of time. Remember, from that eclipse that we talked about earlier to December 21st, 2012 is 888 hours. 888 hours. That's what it is. So, Brian, why don't you take it back over and go in whichever direction that you see fit. We've got plenty to share. We're not going to run out of material, that's for sure.
Some of the things first to take a look at here with the pyramid is that basically back a few months ago, Matthew had asked me to take a look at what was sitting 23.5 degrees away from the Great Pyramid. Now, the reason that this was done was due to the fact that the axis of our planet has shifted 23.5 degrees from the time when the axis was straight up and down, thus the days of Noah. Now, it gets real interesting once you go over to this area in Hebron and you start looking at the measurements and the nautical miles. Right here, basically, I have a photo in here that the measurement of the nautical miles from the capstone of the Great Pyramid to Hebron is 225 nautical miles. Running north to the Temple Mount is another 16 nautical miles from that spot in Hebron. Now, once you start running these numbers into various calculations within geometry, you start to get some real interesting results. Now, the first set of calculations is the area is essentially 225 plus 225 would come out to 450. And the next factor would be the height multiplied by the area, which is 16 times 450, which is 7,200. To get the volume, the number is divided by 3. That brings you back around to 2,400. And each one of these is in direct proportion to the measure of time itself, especially when compared to a circle of 360 degrees. If you drop the zeros, you end up with 45 and 72 degrees, and 24 could be brought out of the 2,400. So right here, you're ending up already with a bunch of numbers that quite literally are connected to the measure of time itself, and where 72 really stands out the most is this is known as part of the precessional year. It's, I believe they call the word a, what is it, a precessional, well, let me read a little bit on this here. It'd be a lot easier to explain it that way. The distance, okay, my mistake. Okay, axial precession is the movement of the rotational axis of an astronomical body, whereby the axis slowly traces out a cone. In the case of Earth, this type of precession is also known as the precession of the equinoxes, or precession of the equator. Earth goes through one such complete precessional cycle in a period of approximately 2,600 years, during which the position of the stars as measured in equatorial coordinate system will slowly change. The change is due to the change of the coordinates over the cycle. Earth's north axial pole moves from where it is now with 1 degree of Polaris in a circle around the ecliptic pole with an angular radius of about 23.5 degrees, or approximately 23 degrees 27 arc minutes. The shift is in 1 degree in 72 years, where the angle taken from the observer, not from the center of the circle. So as I had just explained before that, all these numbers that are in direct line of this 23.5 degree area north into Israel is taking you into Hebron. But as if that's not a big enough factor alone, there's a lot more that goes on with the Great Pyramid itself. Another thing here to mention is, as well, is the fact alone that the shafts of the Great Pyramid have encoded within them multiple timelines. There's quite a few researchers that throughout the years have figured out variants within the measurements of the pyramid itself are locked into various times in the history of the nation of Israel. For instance, the Exodus, the exact date of the Exodus is encoded within a measurement within the shaft of the pyramid and it continues to go forward into the different captivities of Israel, and even forward to the very date of the birth of Christ up to his crucifixion. All of these things locked into the shaft in the pyramid. Now, there's a lot of common thought that the pyramids had been built at some time after the flood, but when you actually sit back and you look at the evidence that points out to the contrary, that it is covered with salt from the sea, staining the entire casing of the outside of the pyramid, once you put 2 and 2 together here, you start to realize that this was built prior to the Great Flood. And then that's where this next piece comes in. Because, and this is a picture you've probably seen many times throughout the night, but this right here is showing the slant of the planet from the ecliptical pole, the 23.5 degree shift of the planet. And there was a book that I had read a few months back when I was doing the research along these lines, that a couple of writers had decided that they were going to look at the shafts quite a bit differently within the Great Pyramid itself. And they came to the conclusion, and I would have to say correctly came to the conclusion, that the 2 intertwining shafts were actually pointing out something very different in time itself altogether. Because what this author had noted was that basically, before the planet would have been thrown off its axis, it would have been pointing at the true North Star of that time, which was one of the stars in the constellation of Draco. And after the planet was kicked off of its axis towards how it is now, to the 23.5 degree angle that we are at, it lined itself up with the North Star of Polaris.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, I hope you enjoyed everything that we had to enlighten about this 888. You'll also have to take note that, the lots of the angles that Brian was just talking about, they're encoded in Ezekiel's temple. And it is amazing that when you know those proportions, those ratios, and those angles, it takes you through the middle of time itself, through its dimensions, through its ratios. That's why we have not been given the heights of his temple, because then you could know everything altogether. So, ladies and gentlemen, everything that we have introduced to you today, I hope that you spend a lot of time researching these things, because we're right in the crux of time itself. We're right there in the crux of time. This has taken us to, take note that the moon breaches its next perigee on December 13th, right in the sweet spot once again. Everything is pointing to this time when, the time the ascension will be beginning, exactly 3 days after the sun passes from Ophiuchus and enters into the sweet spot, so to speak. So I hope everybody enjoyed this, and if we had any technical difficulties, just let us know, and we'll try to fix it. And all the people that we've been discoursing with through emails, and even the popular social media sites, and the social networking sites, I hope that you heard a lot today that answered a lot of your questions that you have. So please take note that we're doing the best we can to get as much out to you as quickly as possible. But it was time for us to do an episode covering this 888 phenomena that David Flynn pointed out in the video that he made. So take note that this calls for much, much, much further study, especially the biblical mechanics. We could have literally stayed all kinds of time, because we even talked about Amos chapter 9. Well, that's one of the wraps with the 888. So we never even got a chance to really bring that to light. So I will end it on that. And until next time, ladies and gentlemen, and God bless.